Undercover Lakota woman in the settler army. After 3 months, she eliminated the chief without trace. She watched helplessly as a ruthless settler murdered her parents in cold blood when she was just a child. That horrific image burned into her memory, fueling years of rage and planning. Now, disguised as a man among the very soldiers who destroyed her family, she spent 3 months earning their trust, learning their weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment. Tonight, she stands over the sleeping form of their leader, the same monster who stole everything from her. Justice has been patient, but tonight it strikes. Before we continue with this story, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and leave your like, as it helps a lot. Go to the comments and write where you're watching this video from. Now let's go to the video after the intro.
Indigenous West Stories.
The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers, weaving between the towering pines that had stood sentinel over Lakota lands for countless generations. Little Ayana walked beside her parents, her small hand clasped tightly in her mother's weathered palm, while her father Lakota scouted ahead with the practiced silence of a man who had learned to read the wilderness like sacred text. They were traveling to visit relatives in a distant village, carrying precious gifts of beadwork and dried buffalo meat that would strengthen the bonds between their people. At 7 years old, Ayana possessed the keen awareness that came naturally to children raised in harmony with the land. She could identify bird calls, track small animals, and sense changes in weather long before adults noticed the shifting winds. But nothing in her young life had prepared her for what was about to unfold in these peaceful woods that had always been her sanctuary. The sound came first. Heavy footsteps crashing through underbrush, with the careless noise of men who had never learned to move with respect for the earth. Lakota's hand shot up in warning, his body tensing like a bowstring as he motioned for his family to stop. His dark eyes scanned the tree line, reading signs that made his blood run cold. These were not the footsteps of fellow Lakota, nor of any indigenous people who understood the sacred silence of the forest. "Settlers," he whispered, the word carrying the weight of a death sentence. His wife Winona immediately understood, her face paling as she pulled Ayana closer. They had heard the stories from other tribes, tales of families who had ventured too far from their villages and never returned, of bodies found mutilated and scalped by bounty hunters who collected payment for every indigenous life they claimed. Lakota's mind raced through their options. They were too far from their village to run, too exposed in this clearing to hide effectively. The approaching voices grew louder, rough and crude, speaking in the harsh English that had become the language of invasion and death across their ancestral lands. He could make out at least 4 distinct voices, maybe more, all armed if they followed the typical pattern of settler militias that roamed these territories. "Ayana," Lakota whispered urgently to his daughter, dropping to one knee to look directly into her intelligent brown eyes. "You must run now. Go to the big oak tree where we saw the eagle's nest yesterday. Climb high and do not come down no matter what you hear. Do not make a sound. Promise me." The little girl's eyes widened with fear, but she had been raised to trust her father's wisdom without question. She nodded solemnly, understanding instinctively that this was not a game or a test of her climbing skills. This was survival. "Run, little eagle," Winona whispered, using her daughter's pet name as she pressed a small medicine pouch into the child's hands. "Fly silent and high." Ayana turned and sprinted toward the massive oak that stood like a guardian at the edge of the clearing. Her small feet made no sound on the forest floor as she had been taught, and within moments she had scrambled up the rough bark to a high branch that was concealed by thick foliage. From her perch, she could see her parents standing together in the clearing below, her father's hand resting on the knife at his belt while her mother clutched her medicine bundle. The settlers emerged from the opposite side of the clearing like predators stalking prey. There were 5 of them, all armed with rifles and wearing the rough clothing of men who lived by violence. Their leader was a tall, lean man with pale eyes and a cruel mouth that seemed permanently twisted into a sneer. His name was Marcus Whitfield, though Ayanna would not learn this until many years later when she began her quest for vengeance. Whitfield had come west with dreams of easy money and unlimited land, but had found instead that the indigenous peoples were not as easily displaced as the government propaganda had promised. Frustrated by his failures as a farmer and businessman, he had turned to bounty hunting, collecting the payments offered by territorial governments for indigenous scalps. It was work that suited his temperament perfectly, allowing him to channel his rage and inadequacy into systematic murder while convincing himself he was performing a patriotic service. "Well, well," Whitfield called out in his gravelly voice, his rifle trained on Dakota's chest. "Look what we found, boys. A couple of savages wandering where they don't belong." Dakota stepped protectively in front of his wife, his hand still resting on his knife, though he knew it would be useless against 5 armed men. "We travel in peace," he said in careful English, hoping to appeal to whatever humanity might remain in these men. "We harm no one. We only pass through to visit family." Whitfield laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made Ayanna shiver in her hiding place high above. "Peace? You Redskins don't know the meaning of a word. Every one of you is a potential threat to decent Christian families trying to build a life out here." One of Whitfield's companions, a stocky man with a graying beard, shifted nervously. "Marcus, they're just traveling. Maybe we should let them go. The woman's not even armed." Whitfield's pale eyes flashed with anger as he turned on his companion. "Getting soft, Henderson? These savages killed my cousin's family down in Colorado, burned their cabin with the children inside. Every one of them needs to pay for what their kind has done." The accusation was a lie, as Ayanna's parents had never traveled to Colorado and had never harmed any settlers. But truth was irrelevant to men like Whitfield, who needed justification for the darkness that lived in their hearts. In his twisted worldview, all indigenous people were guilty of the crimes committed by any indigenous person, making every encounter an opportunity for revenge. Dakota sensed the shift in the air, the way the tension ratcheted up like a storm about to break. He had seen this look in the eyes of white men before, the cold calculation that preceded violence. "Please," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "We have done nothing wrong. Let us pass, and you will never see us again." "Oh, I know I'll never see you again," Whitfield said, raising his rifle to his shoulder. "Because dead savages don't travel anywhere." The first shot shattered the morning silence like thunder, the bullet catching Dakota in the chest and spinning him around before he collapsed to the forest floor. Winona screamed, dropping to her knees beside her husband as blood spread across his buckskin shirt. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying desperately to stem the flow of life from the man she had loved since childhood. High in the oak tree, Ayanna bit down on her own hand to keep from crying out, tears streaming down her face as she watched her father's life ebbing away. Every instinct screamed at her to climb down and run to her parents, but her father's final command echoed in her mind: "Stay hidden, stay silent, survive." Whitfield approached the wounded man with casual cruelty, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. Dakota was still alive, his eyes fixed on his wife's face as he struggled to speak. "Take care of our daughter," he whispered, using the last of his strength to express his love. "How touching," Whitfield sneered, placing the barrel of his rifle against Dakota's forehead. "Don't worry, savage. You'll be reunited with your ancestors real soon." The second shot ended Dakota's suffering, but it also sealed Whitfield's fate, though he would not realize it for many years to come. In that moment, watching her father's murder, something fundamental changed in 7-year-old Ayanna. The innocent child who had awakened that morning died along with her father, replaced by someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Winona's grief-stricken wails filled the clearing as she cradled her husband's lifeless body. She rocked back and forth, singing a traditional death song in the Lakota language, her voice carrying both sorrow and defiance. The sound seemed to irritate Whitfield, who gestured impatiently to his men. "Shut her up," he ordered. "That caterwauling is giving me a headache." Henderson stepped forward reluctantly. "Marcus, she's just grieving. Maybe we should just take what they have and leave. We've already—" "I said shut her up," Whitfield roared, his face flushing red with rage. "I'm sick of listening to their heathen noise." When Henderson hesitated, Whitfield pushed him aside and grabbed Winona by her long black hair, yanking her head back to expose her throat. She looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only profound sadness and a dignity that seemed to infuriate him even more. "Please," she whispered in English, her voice barely audible. "Let me bury my husband. Let me sing him to the spirit world. The only place you're going is to hell." Whitfield snarled, drawing his knife. "Right where all you savages belong." The blade flashed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, and Winona's death song was cut short by a gurgling gasp. She fell forward across her husband's body, her blood mingling with his on the forest floor that had once been sacred ground. From her hiding place, Ayana watched it all with eyes that would never again see the world as a safe place. She memorized every detail of her parents' killer. His pale, cruel eyes, the scar that ran along his left jawline, the way he moved with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed himself untouchable. Most importantly, she memorized his voice, the harsh sound of his laughter as he wiped his bloody knife clean on her mother's dress. "Check them for anything valuable," Whitfield ordered his men as he began the grisly process of scalping his victims. "These savages sometimes carry silver or trade goods." The other men searched through her parents' belongings with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some seemed sickened by what they had witnessed, while others appeared indifferent to the violence. Only Whitfield seemed to take actual pleasure in the carnage, humming tunelessly as he worked. They found the beadwork and dried meat that Ayana's family had been carrying as gifts, along with a small pouch of silver coins that Dakota had earned trading with friendly settlers in distant towns. Whitfield pocketed the money, while his men divided the other items among themselves. "Should we bury them?" Henderson asked, his voice subdued. Whitfield looked up from his bloody work with surprise. "Bury them? Hell no. Let the animals have them. Might teach other savages to stay off our land." "This isn't our land, Marcus," Henderson said quietly. "This is still treaty territory." "Treaties are just paper," Whitfield replied, standing and stretching his back. "The only law out here is what we make it, and I say this whole territory belongs to white men now." The group gathered their stolen goods and prepared to leave. But Whitfield paused at the edge of the clearing for one last look at his handiwork. His pale eyes scanned the tree line with the predatory awareness of a natural killer, and for a terrifying moment, Ayana thought he might have spotted her hiding place. "You hear that?" he asked his men, tilting his head to listen. "Hear what?" Henderson replied nervously. "Nothing," Whitfield said with satisfaction. "Perfect silence. That's the sound of progress, boys. That's the sound of civilization coming to the wilderness." They disappeared into the forest as suddenly as they had appeared, their crude laughter and conversation fading until only the natural sounds of the woods remained. Still, Ayana waited in her tree for what felt like hours, too terrified to move and too traumatized to think clearly about what she should do next. When she finally climbed down from the oak tree, her legs were shaky and her hands were numb from gripping the branches so tightly. She approached her parents' bodies with the slow, reluctant steps of a child who understood that seeing them up close would make their deaths finally horribly real. They lay together in death as they had lived in life, her father's arm draped protectively over her mother's shoulders. But the peaceful image was destroyed by the violence that had been done to them, the bullet wounds, the knife cuts. the missing scalps that had been taken as trophies. Ayana fell to her knees beside them and wept until no more tears would come. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of red that reminded her too much of blood, Ayana knew she had to make a choice. She could try to find her way back to her village, a journey of several days through dangerous territory that she had never traveled alone. Or she could try to reach the relatives they had been traveling to visit, though she was not entirely sure of the direction. But as she knelt beside her parents' bodies, a third option began to form in her mind, one that would have horrified her gentle, peace-loving parents, but felt as natural as breathing to the traumatized child she had become. She would survive, yes, she would grow strong, and someday, somehow, she would find the pale-eyed man who had destroyed her family and make him pay for what he had done. Using her small hands and a sharp stick, Ayana managed to dig shallow graves for her parents in the soft earth beside the oak tree. It was exhausting work for a 7-year-old, and the graves were not as deep as they should have been, but it was the best she could do. She covered them with stones and branches to protect them from scavengers, then sang the death songs her mother had taught her young voice carrying across the darkening forest. Before she left, she made a solemn vow to the spirits of her parents and to the ancient oak that had sheltered her. During the worst day of her life, she would not rest until justice was done. She would not know peace until the man with pale eyes had paid for his crimes. And she would use whatever means necessary to achieve that goal, even if it meant becoming something her parents would not recognize. The journey back to her village took 4 days, during which Ayana survived on berries, roots, and stream water. She traveled mostly at night to avoid other settlers, sleeping hidden in thick brush during the day. When she finally stumbled into her village, exhausted and half-starved, she told the tribal elders what had happened, but kept her vow of vengeance to herself. The village mourned the loss of Lakota and Winona, who had been respected members of the community. But they also celebrated Ayana's survival, seeing it as a sign that the spirits had protected her for some greater purpose. They could not have imagined what that purpose would ultimately become. As the years passed, Ayana grew from a traumatized child into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and determination. She learned everything she could about the white settlers who were flooding into Lakota territory, their languages, their customs, their weaknesses. She studied their military tactics and their weapons, understanding that knowledge would be her greatest advantage when the time came for revenge. She also learned to hide her true feelings behind a mask of calm acceptance. To her adoptive family and friends, she seemed to have recovered from her childhood trauma and adapted well to the changing world around them. They had no idea that every day she spent years planning and preparing for a confrontation that might not come for decades. When Ayana turned 18, she made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She left her village under the pretense of seeking her own path as an adult, but her real destination was the growing settlement of Deadwood, where rumors suggested that Marcus Whitfield had established himself as a leader among the local militia groups. The transformation began slowly. Ayana had always been tall for a Lakota woman, with angular features that could pass for masculine in the right light. She cut her long black hair short, bound her breasts flat against her chest, and practiced walking and talking like a man until the deception became second nature. She stole clothes from a trading post and created a new identity as Adam Crow, a half-breed scout, looking for work with the territorial army. The irony was not lost on her that she was using the very prejudices of white society to her advantage. They expected indigenous people to be either noble savages or dangerous enemies, never ordinary individuals capable of complex deception. A half-breed scout was exotic enough to be interesting, but familiar enough to be trusted, especially one who claimed to have been raised by white missionaries. Getting into Whitfield's militia was easier than she had expected. The territorial government was offering good money for experienced scouts who could help them track and eliminate hostile indigenous groups, and Ayana's knowledge of Lakota customs and territory made her invaluable. She presented herself as someone who had turned against her own people out of loyalty to white civilization, a narrative that appealed to men like Whitfield who needed to believe that their cause was just. Marcus Whitfield had changed in the 11 years since that morning in the forest, but not for the better. Success as a militia leader had made him arrogant and cruel, while the constant violence had stripped away whatever humanity he might have once possessed. He ruled his men through fear and intimidation, quick to punish any sign of weakness or dissent. But he was also careless in the way that powerful men often become, surrounded by subordinates who told him what he wanted to hear and convinced of his own invincibility. He never looked too closely at the quiet half-breed scout who had joined his ranks, never questioned why Adam Crow never spoke unless spoken to, or why he always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. For 3 months, Ayana lived among her parents' killers, learning their routines and weaknesses while waiting for the perfect opportunity. She discovered that Whitfield had a private quarters in the fort where he conducted his business and entertained visitors. More importantly, she learned that he often worked late into the night, alone and unguarded, reviewing reports and planning future operations. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day she had to listen to Whitfield and his men boast about their victories over indigenous families, had to nod and smile when they described atrocities that made her stomach turn. She watched him give orders that would result in the deaths of people who might have been her friends or relatives, all while maintaining the facade of loyalty that kept her close to her target. But she also gathered intelligence that she secretly passed to Lakota resistance fighters, helping them avoid ambushes and protect their families. It was dangerous work that could have exposed her at any time, but it helped her maintain some sense of honor while surrounded by dishonor. The night she chose for her revenge was moonless and cold, with a bitter wind that howled through the gaps in the fort's wooden walls. Most of the men were asleep in their barracks, exhausted from a long patrol that had returned empty-handed. Whitfield was in his office as usual, hunched over maps and reports by lamplight, planning his next campaign against the savage menace. Ayana had spent weeks studying the layout of the fort and the patterns of the guards. She knew exactly when and where she could move without being seen, which shadows would conceal her passage, and which floorboards creaked under pressure. She had also prepared her escape route, identifying 3 different ways to leave, the fort undetected depending on which direction the guards were facing. She made her way through the darkened corridors like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the wooden floors. The traditional Lakota clothing she wore beneath her stolen army uniform felt like armor, connecting her to the spirits of her ancestors and the sacred purpose that drove her forward. In her hand, she carried her father's knife, the one weapon the settlers had overlooked when they searched his body. Whitfield's office. A door was unlocked, a sign of the arrogance that would finally prove his downfall. Ayana slipped inside and closed the door behind her, then stood for a moment watching the man who had haunted her dreams for 11 years. He looked older and softer than she remembered, his pale hair thinning and his cruel mouth surrounded by lines of dissipation. She moved across the room with the fluid grace of a predator, her knife held ready but not yet visible. Whitfield was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice her approach until she was standing directly behind his chair. "Working late again, Marcus?" she said softly, her voice carrying the slight accent she had cultivated as part of her disguise. Whitfield started and began to turn around, but froze when he felt the point of her knife against his throat. "Adam, what the hell are you doing?" "My name is not Adam," Ayana said, her voice dropping to its natural register as she abandoned the masculine persona she had maintained for months. "My name is Ayana, daughter of Dakota and Winona of the Lakota people." She saw the moment of recognition in his pale eyes, the flash of memory that connected the woman behind him to the family he had murdered in a forest clearing 11 years ago. His face went white with shock and fear as he realized that his past had finally caught up with him. "You," he whispered, "but you were just a child. How did you—" "I was 7 years old when you murdered my parents," Ayana continued, her voice steady despite the emotions raging in her chest. "I watched from the oak tree where my father told me to hide. I saw you shoot him down like an animal. I saw you cut my mother's throat while she grieved over his body." Whitfield's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. The quiet, reliable scout he had trusted for months was actually the daughter of people he had killed over a decade ago. The implications were staggering. How long had she been planning this? How much did she know about his operations? How had she managed to deceive him so completely? "Listen," he said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone of a man trying to bargain for his life. "That was a long time ago. I was a different man then. The war, the pressure from the government, it made us all do things we regret." "Regret?" Ayana's voice carried a note of incredulous anger. "You laughed while you scalped them. You joked about leaving their bodies for the animals. You felt no regret then, and you feel none now." She was right, and they both knew it. Whitfield had killed dozens of Indigenous people over the years and had never lost a moment's sleep over any of them. His attempt at remorse was just another lie, as transparent as all the others he had told himself to justify his actions. "What do you want?" he asked desperately. "Money? Information? I can give you anything you need. Just name your price." "There is no price for what you took from me," Ayana replied. "There is only justice." She pressed the knife deeper into his throat, drawing a thin line of blood that trickled down his neck. Whitfield tried to pull away, but her grip on his hair held him firmly in place. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Whitfield was completely powerless, at the mercy of someone he had wronged. "Please," he whispered, all pretense of bravery abandoned. "I have a family now, a wife and children. They need me." "My parents needed each other," Ayana said coldly. "I needed them. Did you think about that when you murdered them? Did you consider the family you were destroying?" The knife moved with surgical precision, opening Whitfield's throat in a single decisive cut. He tried to scream, but only blood came out, bubbling and frothing as his life drained away onto the maps and reports that had been his obsession. His pale eyes, which had been so cold and cruel in life, stared sightlessly at the ceiling as his body went limp in the chair. Ayana held him until she was certain he was dead, then carefully arranged his body to look as if he had fallen asleep at his desk. In the dim lamplight, it might be hours before anyone noticed that the dark stain spreading across his papers was blood rather than spilled ink. She cleaned her father's knife on Whitfield's shirt, then tucked it back into her belt. The weapon had finally served its true purpose, carrying out the justice that had been denied for 11 years. She felt a sense of completion, as if a circle that had been broken by violence had finally been closed by vengeance. But her work was not finished. She still had to escape the fort without being detected, a challenge that would require all the skills she had developed during her months of deception. She changed back into her army uniform, hiding her traditional clothing in a bundle that she would retrieve later. The corridors were still empty as she made her way toward the exit she had chosen weeks ago. A loose board in the fort's outer wall could be moved just enough to allow a slim person to squeeze through, emerging in the shadows behind the stables where the guards rarely patrolled. She was almost to her destination when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Her heart raced as she ducked into an alcove, pressing herself against the wall and holding her breath. A sleepy guard walked past, carrying a lantern and muttering complaints about the cold night air. When the guard had passed, Ayana continued to her escape route. The loose board moved easily under her hands, and within moments she was outside the fort, breathing the cold night air and feeling the wind on her face. She retrieved her hidden bundle of traditional clothing and disappeared into the darkness beyond the settlement. By dawn, she was miles away, traveling on foot through terrain that would be difficult for mounted pursuers to follow. She had planned multiple routes and cached supplies at various points, understanding that her escape would need to be as carefully orchestrated as her infiltration. When Whitfield's body was discovered the next morning, the fort erupted in confusion and anger. The men who had served under him could not understand how their leader had been killed without anyone hearing or seeing anything suspicious. Some suspected treachery from within their own ranks, while others blamed hostile indigenous raiders who had somehow penetrated their defenses. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Adam Crow had vanished as completely as if he had never existed, leaving behind no trace of his true identity or his connection to the murdered commander. The other scouts and soldiers remembered him as quiet and reliable, but realized they knew almost nothing about his background or personal life. Some of the men suspected that the half-breed scout might have been involved, but they had no evidence and no way to track him down. The official report concluded that Whitfield had been killed by unknown assailants who had somehow infiltrated the fort, carried out their mission, and escaped without detection. Ayanna made her way back to Lakota territory, but she did not return to her adoptive village. Too much had changed in the years since she left, and she was no longer the person who had grown up there. The quest for vengeance had transformed her into something harder and more solitary. Someone who could never again live a simple, peaceful life. Instead, she established herself as a guardian of sorts, using the skills she had developed to protect other indigenous families from the kind of violence that had destroyed her own. She became a ghost story among the settlers, a mysterious figure who appeared whenever innocent people were threatened and disappeared just as quickly when justice had been served. The pale-eyed man who had murdered her parents was dead, but the system that had created him remained. Ayanna understood that her work would never truly be finished as long as men like Whitfield continued to profit from violence against her people. She had found her purpose in that understanding, becoming a weapon wielded by justice itself. Years later, when the story of Marcus Whitfield's mysterious death had become legend among both settlers and indigenous peoples, some would say that his killer had been a vengeful spirit sent by the victims of his crimes. Others claimed it was the work of a secret society dedicated to protecting the innocent from predators like him. But Ayanna knew the truth was both simpler and more complex than any legend. She had been a 7-year-old child who watched her parents die and made a promise to their spirits. She had spent 11 years becoming someone capable of keeping that promise, and when the moment came, she had acted without hesitation or mercy. The little girl, who had hidden in the oak tree, was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes justice could only be achieved through violence. It was not the life her parents would have chosen for her, but it was the life their deaths had made necessary. In the end, Marcus Whitfield died as he had lived, alone, afraid, and at the mercy of forces beyond his control. The difference was that this time, those forces served justice rather than cruelty, wielded by someone who had every right to demand payment for the debts he had incurred. The forest where her parents died had long since reclaimed their graves, but their spirits lived on in their daughter's dedication to protecting others from the kind of evil that had destroyed their family. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the American frontier, a woman who had once been called Ayanna continued her work, ensuring that predators like Marcus Whitfield learned too late that some crimes could never be forgotten or forgiven.